Hi everyone, welcome to our second session on panel 4, Evaluating for Justice and Equality. Those aspects, justice and equality, need to be considered in all ways of the energy transition, and the 4 papers in this session look at a range of different topics and levels of detail, from conceptualizing and deriving metrics for fairness to the effect on communities transitioning away from dirty technology, to thinking about lighting, taking into account women's and girls' needs, and looking at energy communities. We hope you enjoy the session. First up today then, we have Eva Heiskanen. Hope that's not too bad. She is a professor in sustainable consumption at the Consumer Society Research Centre in Finland. She has worked on energy and environmental issues in consumer and organisational studies since 1991. Her current project focuses on citizens' everyday life and tensions in the energy transition. Eva, over to you, please.
Hello, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this session. I will be speaking about some perspectives and methods for monitoring and evaluating the fairness of the energy transition. I am Eva Heiskanen, and I've written the paper together with colleagues Senja Laakso, Kaisa Matsos, Jenny Rinkinen. We're all from the University of Helsinki, Finland. And I'll say a few words about why we might need some indicators for the fairness of the energy transition, introduce 3 concepts and literatures that we've been looking at, what issues are currently being raised in these literatures, then present a tentative set of composite indicators and an example and some ideas for further work. So the motivation for my research is that until now, the energy transition has really relied on work by forerunners and pioneers. And as it spreads, it changes shape and touches more people's lives and in more different ways. So in addition to investing in renewable energy, there are also needs to invest in electrification so that we can phase out fossil fuels, and demand response so that we can manage intermittent solar and wind power production in our energy system. And the question arises whether all kinds of people can feel ownership in addition to the forerunners and pioneers, and how we deal with some of the tensions that are perhaps unavoidable. And whether policymakers can understand and perhaps even anticipate issues that are often combinations of various objective, subjective, and situational factors. And instead of justice, though we've read a lot on energy justice, we prefer to speak of fairness. And by this we mean a sort of contextual and not universalist interpretation of justice, so one which is within our time and place, current geographic and temporal context, and that also considers perceived legitimacy and public support in addition to more objective issues. And we've considered these indicators via literatures on 3 topical concepts. One is energy vulnerability. So a concept which is not only looking at objective measures of poverty, but also at intersecting risks and lived experience of vulnerability. Energy democracy, which argues that civic participation in distributed energy production will give power to the people and will make the energy system more democratic, and acceptability, where in addition to these distributional issues and procedural issues, also issues of recognition are very important. How people feel they are being considered, and whether how the issues of the energy transition intersect with people's local and other identities, and how they are more and more part of identity and partisan politics. The first concept, energy vulnerability, traditionally it has been measured in terms of high energy costs and low income. So, for example, indicators like inability to keep one's home warm or being late on energy bills have been indicators that, for example, Eurostat has used, and some countries also consider special groups like pensioners as deserving of benefits to alleviate or mitigate energy poverty. Current research, in addition, emphasizes that the energy vulnerability manifests in many different forms, considering climate conditions, whether it's too hot or too cold, transport costs, which are often not considered in traditional measures of fuel poverty, access to digital technology, access to capital, and employment opportunities. There is a lot of emphasis now on spatial vulnerabilities, such as dwelling characteristics, mobility needs depending on geographic location, as well as economic and political marginalization of particular regions. And recognition of particular unrecognized vulnerable groups, such as disabled people, tenants, single parents, or ethnic minorities. And the research is also more and more considering the lived experience of vulnerability and intersecting vulnerabilities, where a person might not be vulnerable on each individual criteria, but when they combine, they can create a risk of energy poverty. Second concept, energy democracy. Traditionally, we have celebrated the share of energy production owned by citizens, and we have been looking at how large a share of people are prosumers, or how many energy communities we have in a country. But current research also raises critical issues about a kind of Athenian form of democracy that only concerns a few. So from this perspective, there has been already quite some criticism or discussion on the fairness of subsidy programs, and whether skills and knowledge for participation in the energy market are accessible to all, or whether people are able to organize, for example, into energy communities, and whether they have the requisite skills. This relates to the inclusiveness and accessibility of energy communities, but it can also relate to how we recognize and understand energy citizenship. Is it only investing, or can people, for example, also be energy citizens through frugal practices of energy use, or, for example, by conducting the actual work of installing some energy equipment? Public acceptance, we have known for some time that public opinion surveys of support for different energy sources can coexist with local opposition towards renewable energy installations. So current research highlights distributional and procedural justice considerations in local renewable energy investments, but also more and more in divestments from fossil fuels. How fairly are these things done? And paying also more attention to recognition justice, whether people feel they are being heard or whether they are protesting. Before protests, perhaps we already have some indicators to be seen in the media and social media in terms of sentiment in different subgroups, be it regional, political, or other. And this also, I would see, relates to discussions on the inclusiveness of local climate activities and movements of people with different identities, and the extent to which different kinds of citizens are recognized as agents of the energy transition. So on the basis of this literature, which I've really briefly reviewed, we have tried to make a proposal for some new composite indicators that combine some of these different issues. So, for example, whether we could look at the intersection of energy vulnerability and democracy, and indeed what kinds of people are energy prosumers, and is prosumerism spreading outside the group of middle class citizens, or do we have energy communities also in low income areas? Looking at energy policy in terms of whether it recognizes frugal practices of those without money to invest, and whether it provides sufficient access to knowledge and skills for participation in, for example, energy production or energy communities. Then on the intersection of energy vulnerability and public acceptance, we could look at existing data in more detail to see how support for energy transition goals is distributed by income and political orientation. We could assess, again, policy in terms of how well it recognizes lived experience and unacknowledged instances of energy vulnerability. We could investigate how the fairness of subsidies and benefits is perceived. And we could also anticipate protests by looking at social media, for example, of regional and subgroup concerns. At the intersection of energy democracy and public acceptance, we definitely still need more research on the distributional and procedural justice of renewable energy investments and fossil fuel divestment processes. And at the intersection of all three, perhaps we can try to measure how inclusive, for example, energy communities are of people with different backgrounds, and how our public communications recognizes various identities for energy citizens. An example from Finland, where I come from, we have a lot of resistance currently by the rural population, especially low-income people living in rural areas, towards climate policies on mobility, such as fuel taxes, electric vehicle subsidies, and discussions about the phase out of internal combustion engines. And I don't think we're alone in this. And there's a combination of objective factors, such as extreme car dependence and a very large share of very old cars in rural areas where this old car cannot be used to trade it for a new electric vehicle. So the distance to an electric vehicle is very long. Perception and perhaps some reality even of the policy as being made from a metropolitan perspective. So all the policymakers, public administrators live in the city and they are rather well-to-do, and they do not recognize, for example, that some people really need a car for their work, not only to get to work, but actually to do their work. And then there's issues of identity and culture, like the centrality of the gas station in rural social life in Finland. So people are very upset and concerned about whether the gas station will disappear and whether they will have to move into the city where they probably might not get a job and could not afford an apartment. So there might be solutions to these problems, but we really need to recognize the intertwining of different issues in the problem. So this was a first shot at proposing some composite indicators based on current academic discussion and combining several perspectives. And I'm sure there's lots of room for improvement. Definitely not a global, but rather current day perspective from Finland, perhaps hopefully to some extent applicable to other parts of Europe. Pending empirical testings, which would need to be done with collaboration with researchers from different countries. I'm sure there are also issues that require more attention. For example, you didn't see the word gender in my presentation, so gender aspect perhaps needs to be developed. So all comments and further ideas are extremely welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. That was great. I'm going to take moderator privilege while we're waiting for some questions to come in from the attendees, and ask you a few questions that I had from your paper. I wanted, I mean, you sort of suggested this on your final slide, but where do you see the metrics you've developed being used? Start with that.
Thanks, Fiona. Really good question. And well, I've been thinking mainly first and foremost about our national policy in Finland, but I think there are other European countries that share some of these similar concerns. And of course, they might manifest in different forms, and because of that, I think it would be important to do this empirical research in collaboration with people from different European countries. But this is definitely a very Europe-centric perspective. So the global issue is much more severe, and the inequalities are so much more severe that I think many of the other issues are sort of overshadowed by the distributional injustices. But it would be interesting to be able to take this forward. Also, but first and foremost on a European level.
Yeah.
And I noticed you also had the question in the chat about whether we've published our findings prior to the summer study. Not really, but we have had some responses for another paper with some similar thoughts, a Finnish language paper, where some of the reviewers clearly didn't really get these. So I think it might not be so easy, that people's life worlds are so distant from each other that people really don't get how other people might be suffering from sort of compound forms of injustices or compound forms of feelings of unfairness. And so I hope that this sort of set of indicators could somehow make issues more visible to people who live in a different social world.
Okay. We've had a question from one of the attendees, Catherine Reindl, I hope that's right. Thank you for a very interesting presentation, Eva. A question of interest: do you know how well is the EV charging infrastructure established in rural areas in Finland? Could charging not be integrated with a gas station so the station doesn't disappear?
Thanks, and hello, Katharina, and thanks for the question. Yes, it's definitely the case that the charging infrastructure is not well established, and I sort of doubt it will ever be established so much in the form of a public charging station, because it is so much more sort of cost effective to charge at home or to install one's own charging station. I don't know, maybe the gas station will survive. It is the only, in many places, the only surviving sort of public space apart from the forest. So people feel strongly about it, and of course it could just be a cafe, but then people would not have this business that they do have to go and fill up their car.
Difficult to replace.
Good question, Katharina.
Okay, so I'll go back to one of my questions, if you don't mind. So a number of different approaches are being put forward for engaging with the public on energy transitions. For example, in the UK, we've had a couple of climate assemblies recently, one that was at UK level, and certainly been some more regional ones. Do you think, do you see a role for maybe the metrics being incorporated in that, or somehow being part of that outreach process?
Thanks. That is definitely a great question, and something I have been thinking about, that we don't really have a big role for sort of public engagement or public participation in the paper, and I definitely see that would also be crucial. Still, I think that it should be preceded perhaps by a better understanding that organizing public engagement requires a rather good understanding of who needs to be engaged, and also being rather thoughtful about who and how to engage people, to invite people from different walks of life, and to organize the setting so that everybody feels they can participate. And I think in the UK, there is a lot of public discussion compared to many other countries,
right.
And there is quite a good awareness of these different sort of, especially energy vulnerability. So I think that many countries are a little blinder, at least my country is a little blinder to some of these issues than they are in the UK. So I definitely need to look into the climate assemblies and learn more about the experiences.
Okay, that's great. Well, I think we've run out of time, I'm afraid, for our
Thanks for
session.
good
So,
questions.
no, you're fine. Hand over to Jessica.
Yes, actually, that was perfect timing. So we are well in time to introduce our next speakers here. So we will have a co-presentation by Veronica Zacco and Ingrid Marascaute-Bull, and they will be presenting about energy poverty and skills related to aspects of the just transition of European coal regions, overlap, and data gaps, and a bit about our speakers. So Dr. Veronica Zacco has been working on the clean energy transition related topics at the European Commission since 2011, and she's currently working at the Joint Research Center in the Netherlands location, and her research focuses on employment, education, and skills related to aspects of clean energy, of the clean energy transition. Ingrida Morascate-Bull is a project officer at the European Commission, JRC, as well, also based in the Netherlands, and she works on different energy-related issues, especially energy and transport poverty, social innovation, and individual energy behavior. All right, I leave the floor to Ingrida and Veronica.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ingrid Morascate-Bull. Together with my colleague Veronica Zacco, we will present our paper on energy poverty and skills-related aspects of the just transition of the European coal regions, their overlaps and data gaps. So Veronica and I work at the Joint Research Center, which is Commission Science and Knowledge Center. And in the Knowledge Management Unit of the JRC, we perform mapping and analysis of relevant knowledge and data. We generate new evidence and also collect and transform some of the already existing knowledge. So we both are part of the team dealing with social aspects of the energy transition. And we work on energy-related topics, in particular employment in the energy sector, energy and transport poverty, social innovation, and other. And we are both based in Petten, which is just north of Amsterdam. Our study focuses on 34 regions with coal industry. We wanted to analyze the overlap of energy poverty and skills-related aspects in the European coal regions, because they are the ones with the highest expected job losses as a transition to carbon-neutral economy progresses. And to answer the question of why 34 regions were selected in particular, we decided to follow a 2018 JRC report on coal regions in transition performed by our colleagues at the JRC, where they had these particular regions identified. So we just decided to further focus on these areas specifically. Our aim is to provide a snapshot of selected regional just transition aspects, focusing on, as you see, digital access and skills, adult learning, reskilling and upskilling, as well as vulnerability to energy poverty. We also wanted to assess the availability of data at the NUTS2 level.
I will take over from here from my colleague. The Green Digital Twin Transition poses a combined challenge to regions with coal industry as well as regions everywhere. So in terms of COVID-19 recovery, as well as existing unemployment and further job losses in the coal sector that are expected, as well as attracting new industries within the context of the future of work. In this process, there is need to have an ability, a good starting point for reskilling workers in declining sectors, as well as other sectors for preparing for the incoming industries. Digital access is crucial, as well as the existence of basic digital skills, basic or above digital skills, especially in the context of remote education technologies, which are gaining ground at the moment. Socioeconomic circumstances can positively or negatively reinforce each other. So basically, if there's a good starting point in terms of poverty, vulnerability to poverty, energy poverty, digital access, and willingness to participate in adult learning, we can have a more positive outcome in the transition. We have developed the table as part of this exercise. In this table, you can see on the left-hand side the regions that are expected to have coal sector job losses until 2030. There are NUTS2 codes and the indicators. So we looked at the unemployment rate, and listed them in terms of existing unemployment rate. On the top are the ones with the dark brown, which have the highest unemployment rate, and in the bottom, the ones with the lowest, with the dark blue. Overall, in the table, dark blue color means better performance in terms of that indicator, and the dark brown means worse performance for all indicators. In the next part of the table, we explore indicators related to digital access, digital skill, and willingness to participate in adult education. And the last part of the table explores indicators which are relevant to vulnerability to poverty and related energy, possible relation to energy poverty. So already here we can see that there are data gaps for some regions in some countries, whereas other indicators are better covered. In terms of digital access and adult learning, some indicators are available at NUTS 2 level, while others are not available. So for example, for digital access related indicator from the ICT usage in household survey, we have the households with broadband access available at NUTS 2 level. And for adult education from the labor force survey, participation in education and training for the 25-64 age group. At the same time, from the adult education survey, we only have NUTS 1, so country level information, which gives more detailed information on participation rate in job-related non-formal education and training. We also have country level information about basic or above basic overall digital skills. So basically we have some indicators available at NUTS 2 level, which can be further complemented by indicators that are country level available. So now turning to energy poverty, I give the word over to you, Ingrid.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm sure that most of you here today are familiar with the socioeconomic phenomenon of energy poverty and know that unfortunately there is no unified definition for it. However, it is commonly understood as the inability to keep the dwelling adequately warm, powered, and warm in the winter and cool in the summer. So energy poverty is affecting a substantial share of the population across the EU. It is estimated that more than 50 million of EU households experience energy poverty as a result of energy inefficient buildings and appliances, high energy expenditures, or just simply low household incomes. As we see, 7.6% of EU population were unable to keep their home adequately warm, and this figure goes as high as 19 when it comes to people at risk of poverty. So this, of course, has some serious implications when it comes to the quality of life of Europeans, which range from health and indoor comfort to air quality, social attainment, and others. The most direct indicators for energy poverty are the ones on the national level, with no adequate indicators at the regional level. And the most commonly used indicators come from EU SILK questionnaire that is based on consensual or self-reported living conditions and access to energy services indicators, as well as household budget survey that provides consumption expenditure data. So yeah, moving on to the energy poverty indicators at NUTS 2 level that we use in our study. So yeah, to provide a picture of indicators that are relevant on the broader scale of the issue and contain energy poverty as part of overall poverty. And following the NUTS 2 indicators, we included people at risk of poverty or social exclusion, a severe material deprivation rate, at risk of poverty rate, people living in households with very low work intensity, and disposable income of private households. The first four indicators are from Income and Living Conditions Survey, EU SILK, provided by Eurostat. And the last one is a Eurostat calculation of Purchasing Power Standard, PPS, based on final consumption by inhabitant. Moreover, although we could not capture this, we acknowledge the importance of monitoring the energy performance of the building stock and how crucial it is for depicting the severity of energy poverty when it comes to households' heating and cooling needs. So poverty indicators should be integrated with building stock indicators such as the level of insulation, the age of the building stock, and the energy class. However, we could not capture this for the purpose of this study, and it was unfortunately a bit out of scope. Poverty, material deprivation, low work intensity, and disposable income indicators reveal some of the important findings and help develop an overall picture of the regional situation when comparing these to what Veronica mentioned before, unemployment, digital, and lifelong learning indicators. The selected indicators for people at risk of poverty, as well as poverty and social inclusion together, they show the biggest share of population affected in those regions that also have some of the highest unemployment rates. This probably comes as no surprise, as there is an expected link between the unemployment then leading to lower income and resulting in poverty, as well as social exclusion of citizens. The indicator of people living in households with low work intensity also followed a rather similar pattern from what I've just described. Spanish and Czech regions had on average the lowest severe material deprivation rates, while Bulgarian regions were some of the most affected ones. The disposable income of private households indicator did not show a very clear connection with the unemployment rate in the region. And households in the German regions in focus were characterized by the relatively highest level of disposable income at the purchasing power standard, whilst regions in, like we see in Romania, Poland, and Hungary by the lowest level. Yeah, so overall, what do we see regarding these specific regions? So the leading regions in terms of digital access, existing digital skills, and participation in adult learning were located in Finland and the UK, whilst as you see regions in Greece, Romania, and Bulgaria have the most space for improvement on this front. Regarding the vulnerability to energy poverty, this showed less clarity as we experienced some data gaps. 4 indicators had no region data for Poland, Germany, and the UK, and the disposable income indicator had no data for the UK. So this is possible that the overall regional data would have shaped out slightly differently regarding these indicators if we had data for all the analyzed regions. However, based on the accessible data, Greek, Hungarian, and Romanian, and also Bulgarian regions had the most space for improvement.
Now moving on to 2 specific indicators. Here we can see 2 maps. On the left side, participation in adult education based on the labor force survey. On the left side, coverage for the whole of Europe, and on the right side for the 34 regions with coal industry in the focus of this analysis. And what is interesting to highlight here is that adult education shows a variation like a north-south and West-East divide within Europe. So basically, if a country has a larger tradition of participation in adult education, it's going to be also true for the regions. So there is a clear distinction at country level. The same cannot be said for the risk of poverty. Here we can see that within countries there is also variation between better performing economically regions and the regions that are performing less well. So basically here we can identify through this approach the regions that are these socioeconomic circumstances either add up in a positive or a negative way. In terms of the way forward, we would need better coverage across all member states for existing indicators and further case studies within the core regions themselves, within the NASTO regions, the wider NASTO regions would give a better understanding of what's happening exactly in these regions, also in terms of socioeconomic starting points, in terms of digital skill and poverty circumstances. In terms of even better to understand the employment and skills aspects of the clean energy transition in these regions and in other regions, it would be good to have more detailed sectoral breakdown of energy industry employment and skills provision. So compared to the traditional breakdown of industry, to have better breakdown in terms of the clean energy industries and the traditional energy industries. So here we would like to thank you for your attention. Keep in touch in these social media channels, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Veronica and Ingrid. If you want to, yep, unmute and put yourselves on video, perfect. A few questions then. I'll start out while our audience is getting warmed up and thinking about the lesson. I actually had a question that I think is partly answered by your last slide about the data, because you've delved into this data a lot and you found some limitations, one in the geographical coverage, but also then in having to use proxies, like you didn't have the energy poverty specific indicators and instead you're using the poverty. In terms of which data is the most useful, is it most useful to have the full geographical coverage so that you can be more comparative, or is it most useful to have the more specific indicators if they had to choose one or the other, or if we're thinking of how to develop this data so that it's more useful for you? Which one is more important for you having done this study, and what do you think would give the more interesting comparisons? And
I think it's I think the two complement each other. So we found this approach useful to really highlight those regions where these disadvantages add up by this simple approach, which can be further developed for composite indicators and adding other indicators or removing some. So basically, also, as we said, the case study approach would give within the region an even better, but that requires like a more deeper dive into specific regions. But if you just want to get a quick overview of what's happening, I think this was a useful addition to the work that we mentioned that was previously done. So I don't know if that answers your question. But
yeah, so I think to get the snapshot, you're saying, okay, if we could have a full snapshot, then we need the high level just as complete as possible. But if we want the specific, we need those specific indicators.
And then we have to use whatever is there to get the snapshot.
Yep. I think also, we sort of highlighted, the main gaps, which again, it didn't allow us fully to then capture the main results. Like we said, that the results potentially might even look a bit differently if we had all the data. So the sort of biggest burden was the fact that we didn't have the data for some regions in a couple of countries at all when it came to these indicators related more to the poverty side, right? But the big issue here is that our indicators relate much more to the broader side of poverty rather than just energy poverty, which is a big problem on its own. We didn't find anything else that was, a good solution for this at this moment.
We recognize the importance of the building side and the physical infrastructure side of the energy poverty indicator, and the limitations on what you can use, what you can't use, how you combine the information from that side. So we've seen other studies that try to do that in different geographic levels.
And would you say that one of your or findings that you're trying to promote to is, do we need to be collecting better data on energy poverty from your point of view?
I think it's always good to have some, as I also said in terms of this, and on the left side, on the employment, do we need better data in terms of breakdown of how many people are employed in renewables and how many in coal, and how you can compare it? I think it's also always, there are the challenges of why it is not done already. I think even if we have like certain case studies that already provides data that can be maybe generalized or applied in other places, I think it's always good to have data in whichever sense. If it's not possible across Europe, okay, but then for some places that can be used elsewhere.
I would definitely agree with everything Veronica just said. And, now with this green transition coming our way, we will notice that, of course, some regions are simply more affected than others. So in order to understand how we have to help those regions in bigger need, those, where we have a big coal sector in place, we have to have the data in order to see what's happening, because there's going to be multiple challenges that those regions will need to address, energy poverty being potentially one of them.
Yeah, which shows energy poverty, at least what was working with, is that in these industrial regions, you have the issue of the prefabricated housing, and at least I'm from Hungary, in my country, that is an issue. And so that if you just look at the situation of a certain family within a region like that, that's why we chose these indicators to have like the living situation, the poverty, and how they can access this highway to the future with the digital access and learning.
Yeah, I'm thinking you mentioned about the Green New Deal and then the multiple challenges too. Do you see that your research also shows that there's a need to align strategies around energy poverty and training with maybe some of the stimulus or other growth policies that might be coming or as part of the Green New Deal? I know that's when we looked at the stimulus in the past for the recession, there was some misalignment between the promotion of policies like weatherization or insulation of homes within the training, that people were trained after the policies had already gone out stimulating the action. Did you have any findings, or do your findings relate to this as well?
Yeah, we just had another discussion with Ingrid she was another working group, but we were in different working groups on a foresight on green jobs, and at least in my working group, one aspect was, should we have the skill development first or the development? So what generates, the skills generate the policy, or the policy the skills? So I think it has to be a conscious development of skills as a response to the development. So I don't think the skills development will come first, but if you have a good starting point, because skills is not only the skill, but how do you the access to the ability to develop the skills. So basically, and also this aspect of the regions, you have to have the starting point to go to the next step. I would like to give over to Ingrid for her take on it.
Just to very briefly add, on this sort of chicken and egg problem that you've just described. Then from this, maybe a little bit more from the policy side, I would like to think that some European policies can be, and initiatives can be very good enablers to then meet that skill shortage. And, in our report, we also mention, let's say that, the EU has launched the Just Transition mechanism, and the funds then go to support the transition and the Just Transition platform to provide sort of technical and advisory support and access to these funds. So yeah, well, hopefully, one thing is going to contribute to improving the other thing, and the funds are going to be there to achieve the main goals that we have set for 2050.
Yes, we can hope, and we can return maybe to this discussion at the end when we're talking to all of our speakers today. Thank you very much, Veronica and Ingrid. I give it over to Fiona to introduce our next speaker.
Great, thank you, Jessica. So our next talk is by Giulia D'Angiolini. She is a project manager and energy efficiency expert at Econolair. She's got more than 10 years experience in the fields of energy efficiency, project design, project management, training and capacity building. Over to you, please, Julia.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Giulia D'Angiolini from Econolair, and I'm going to present the paper Lighting the Way to Social Equality. The objective of the study is to outline and provide a state-of-the-art of existing literature and an overview of ongoing and recent projects on street lighting in sub-Saharan Africa to analyze the correlation between gender and street lighting. The study was commissioned by the French Development Agency, AFD, and financed by the European Union in the framework of the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa initiative. The research methodology is built on 4 main research questions. What are the urban specificities that exclude women from public spaces? How can street lighting improve the safety of women in urban areas? How can we ensure that street lighting reassures people and encourages them to go out after dark? And what technologies and standards make an urban space safer? The analysis framework included a literature review of existing references on gender-responsive urbanism and street lighting systems, methods already used for promoting social inclusion and gender equality in selected cities at the international level, such as Vienna, Barcelona, New Delhi, Cape Town, and so on, and Econolair's and AFD's network of street lighting project designers and managers to obtain their feedback on the research questions. This analysis framework allowed us to define the gender-responsive street lighting approach, identify long-term and impact benefit of gender-responsive street lighting, and determine the relation between the voices of women and the design and the decision-making process of street lighting projects. First of all, it was important to define some key concepts to analyze the issues of gender equality and social inclusion in the urban environment. Gender roles have been identified as recognizing the traditional conceptions of gender to understand the responsibilities of each sex and how this affects the use of and the movement in public spaces. The reproductive role of women includes the care and to work performed for remuneration in cash and in kind, such as market production, informal production, domestic production, and so on. And the community management role of women includes work mainly related to care and unpaid labor, and the provision of collective resources such as water, healthcare, and ceremonies. Another key concept that has been analyzed is the good and well gap. A gender gap prevails due to social, economic, cultural, legal, and also institutional factors, and affects women's control, use, and ownership of different services like land, houses, equipment, vehicles, and so on. Another key concept is the gendered informal sector experience. The informal sector is defined as an unincorporated and unregistered market enterprises that sell at least part of the goods and services they produce. The informal sector in sub-Saharan Africa accounts for more than 70% of non-agricultural jobs, and the rate of women working in the formal sector is very high. In this region, more than 80% of employed women work in the informal sector. The last key concept we analyzed is the intersectionality. That is a theoretical framework that needs to understand how a person's social and political identities combine to create different experiences of discrimination and privileges. Social political identities include gender, caste, sex, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender orientation and identity, religion, ability, and so on. These intersecting and overlapping social identities can be both empowering and oppressive. Understanding the intersectionality is critical to avoid perceiving women and girls as a unique homogeneous group, and highlights how prejudices can end up and affect people differently. Traditional urban design leads to three main exclusion patterns of women and girls, which are based on the following factors. Spatial planning is related to the cities encompassing distinct residential and employment zones, often linked only by extensive road systems. This bias led to the perception of the modern city as inappropriate for women. Almost 80% of public space in cities is used by men, Meanwhile, women, especially young women and teenager girls, feel 10 times less secure and safe in public space. Economic factors depend on the increased urbanization around the world, coupled with unprecedented levels of informal settlements and a significant increase in informal employment, means that cities foster a range of gendered intersectional injustice. There is a direct link between urbanization and gender poverty in many cities, especially for those that are not accessing the remunerated daytime labor market. Social factors is related, of course, to gender violence in public spaces. That is one of the most neglected types of violence and is rarely addressed by policy and regulatory frameworks. Key factors for a safer urban space have been identified during the research. Those are defined under two sectors, the technology and the urban design. Aspects of the technology sector include the perception of women to be more safer when the street lighting is designed and implemented with the high quality LED light that enables them to distinguish shapes and color. Furthermore, the warm light is highly preferred from women as in a sense is optimal for drivers and pedestrians, especially with temperature of 4000 Kelvin, and also entails minimal exposure to the blue light, which is detrimental to human health. Under the urban design specificities, women highlight that an adequate vertical illumination allows for better visual perception of non-road characteristics, such as facial features or clothing on a person or color of clothing and so on. Multiple light sources and surfaces with different reflective values make women feel most safe. And also keep lights low to the ground and use properly designed lighting fixture to avoid lighting wastages and light pollution to ensure clear and well-lit access to the exits. And furthermore, providing light levels that allow to the recognition of an approaching person face from 10-15 meters away is one of the elements women highlight. And from a technical point of view, avoid cut-off or glare that can limit visibility by creating deep shadows, restricting the eye's ability to adapt to low light conditions and creating contrast between light and dark areas is also very important. What transpired from the analysis conducted is that the perception of cities as gender-neutral entities is inaccurate. It actually shows that women and girls have been marginalized from public spaces due to spatial planning and economic and social factors. Gender-based violence, which encompasses street harassment and sexual violence, is pervasive and causes women to fear for their safety and also push them to adapt their behavior and modify their urban commute. Public spaces have a role in shaping a favorable urban environment, but more importantly, they are also democratic right for all citizens. Consequently, city administrators and planners must apply a gender-responsive approach when designing public spaces by including 6 different criteria. The intersectionality, so how the individual's different social political identities impact their perception of safety. Design the street lighting system for both motorized and pedestrian road users that targets all relevant urban spaces, including public spaces, parks, markets, and so on. Design a street lighting system using energy and cost-efficient technologies that emit low carbon emissions and limit detrimental impacts on safety, health, and the environment, and address both women and girls' practical and strategic gender needs regarding urban safety. Promote women's economic, social, and political involvement and empowerment by increasing women's income generating opportunities and also involving women and girls as active stakeholders in the planning and design of the street lighting systems, and involving them as municipal decision makers in the street lighting development and implementation. Planning, implementation, and evaluation that are undertaken along with other initiatives to address gender-based violence in cities and mainstream gender in municipal affairs. All these factors allowed us to define the gender-responsive street lighting that use an intersectional gender approach, address women and girls' urban safety needs, and actively enable women economic, social, and political empowerment. Finally, we have developed a kind of roadmap to develop a gender-responsive approach along the 5 steps identified for a street lighting project design: the project organization preparation, the planning and design, procurement procedures, construction, operation, and maintenance. Some of these, let's say, necessary action to be considered when planning a gender-responsive approach are, for example, under the project and organization and preparation, ensure that women are included in the project team and in decision-making power positions. Recruit a local gender expert as part of the team. Under the planning and design, establishing an inclusive and gender-balanced stakeholder consultation process through interviews, mental mapping, exploratory walks, surveys, focus group discussions, collaboration with the civil society, and so on, and use main outcomes from this process to plan and design the street lighting system. Ensure that the street lighting system are energy and cost efficient and emit low carbon emissions and limit detriment impacts on safety, and also design a gender responsive monitoring and evaluation plan. If you have any question, I'm here to respond, and if you want to contact me, you can write me an email at the address included in the last slide. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Julia. That was a great introduction to your paper, which I'm sure other people want to get more detail of and read it in full. I'm going to start off with some questions while our attendees come up with some others. First off, I was just curious. I mean, I get the impression that Econolaire works in a lot of different medium and low income countries. Is street lighting quite a keen area of activity? Is that something that's happening quite a lot?
Yeah, it is. We do a lot of projects on street lighting in emerging economies, but also developing countries. And personally, in the last year, I think I did like 5 projects and only for street lighting. And this one is the only one that included the gender aspect, in the sense that we really analyzed how the gender can be impacted from the structure, the infrastructure of street lighting. And it was super interesting because it's an aspect that is not really even conceived when planning a project on infrastructure like street lighting.
People haven't even thought to ask the question before.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm interested, I guess you've reported this to your funders.
Yeah.
What was their reaction? How have they?
So this is only first stage of our project. So it's really I will say the project, because we did an overview of the international situation, analyzing a lot of case studies and the best practices at the international level, especially in developed countries, because there are a few cities that already implemented the gender and street lighting connection. But we also did in-depth diagnostics in 2 cities, in Kampala and Nouakchott, for projects on street lighting that are ongoing. And so we had this exchange with our donors, and we are organized already a workshop with the AFT. And we are going to do another webinar with the administrators, actually, the municipality administrators in the 2 cities, and another webinar with the funders, so the GIZ and the others that participate at this Covenant of Mayor. And for now, I can't tell you exactly what is their feedback because we still haven't organized it, but cities are super interested in including gender in their project, and not only in street lighting, because it's not only related to street lighting, it's any aspect of energy and energy efficiency especially.
Sure. So there's a question which I think is from your colleague, Amandine Gall, is how to follow up on street lighting and gender and webinar and publication. I think you've covered that.
Yeah.
So in the course of this research, you did interview people involved in street lighting in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
And none of them had actually considered gender. I just wondered, as part of that sort of interaction, some of those were still ongoing. Had that influenced how they approached what they were doing, do you think, or was it too far down the path to be able to sort of add in the gender aspect?
So the 2 projects are actually developed by the AFT with the cities or the region. It depends on the authority in charge of the street lighting. Mm-hmm. So we are sure that they will follow our suggestions and recommendations. But I can tell you that it was not easy to reach out people in the cities, because of the COVID pandemic, and it was super difficult to organize meetings and so on. But people who were attending our meetings really interacted in a positive way, and they provided us with a lot of information that really allowed us to make recommendations on, and I was thinking at the first presentation we had in this session, on how it's important to involve the civil society when you do any kind of energy project. I will say any project, but whatever, any infrastructure project, because you can really learn a lot about the real needs of people.
That's brilliant. Okay, well, I think, unfortunately we've run out of time on this, but maybe we can pick some of that up later.
With pleasure.
Thank you very much, Julia. And I have the pleasure now of introducing our last speaker for this session. Our last speaker is Jordan Carl Young. Jordan is a junior researcher at DuneWorks, which is a small research institute based in the Netherlands, which focuses on enabling just and inclusive societal transitions. He studied economics and urban environmental policy at the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands, and his primary research topics are the role of collaborative learning in sustainability transitions and the role of justice in the energy transition. Today, Jordan is going to talk to you about monitoring and evaluating environmental justice of peer-to-peer energy communities. So let's get Jordan's presentation up.
So, hi there, my name is Jordan Young, and I am here to present our work on monitoring and evaluating justice in the context of developing energy communities. In the past 4 months, we've been building a framework for monitoring and evaluating end-user engagement in energy communities, which are developed within the Horizon 2020 project Lightness. And within this paper, the framework is theoretically developed based on environmental and energy justice literature. Secondly, preliminary results of applying the framework within the Lightness project are derived. And thirdly, the use and the relevance of the framework are discussed. The development of the framework is closely tied to the progress within the Lightness project. Therefore, I will firstly describe the context of the project to you. The aim of the project is to develop citizen energy communities in pilot projects in 5 European countries. The user engagement and the development of the citizen energy communities revolves around householders interacting with 2 digital platforms. One is for the monitoring and trading of energy, as well as stimulating energy efficient behavior. And the second is for decision-making about energy infrastructure within the community. The pilot sites already constitute existing communities which are bound through a collective need for energy, typically by sharing some sort of housing. The Italian pilot site is a 8-apartment condominium in Cagliari. The French pilot site is a business park consisting of more than 150 businesses. The Spanish pilot site is an entire village. In the Polish pilot site we find an entire block of apartments, 3 blocks of apartments. And in the Netherlands, there's a residential neighborhood with social tenants. So what the project actually does is that it recruits a group of participants from the larger already existing community. So from the condominium, from the village, from the blocks of apartments. And this group of participants forms the pilot citizen energy community. The engagement with this group is aimed to result in fostering a fully mature citizen energy community within the pilot site. The engagement with end users takes place within 8 phases, each with different activities and a varying degree of involvement of project partners. The first phase is the pre-engagement analysis, which gives us a sort of baseline scenario. The second is the recruitment phase, which ends at the kickoff workshop, where participants state their ambitions and expectations regarding involvement in the project. The third is the first of 2 digital workshops, where participants interact with one of the digital tools, the one for energy monitoring and trading. The 5th workshop is the midterm engagement workshop, where participants reflect about the engagement process so far. The 6th workshop is the engagement workshop with 2 of the digital tools. The 7th workshop is an evaluation workshop, where the project partners and the participants reflect on the engagement process. And lastly, to come to a conclusion about evaluating justice, of the engagement process, there's a post-engagement analysis. Theoretically, our framework is based on energy and environmental justice. We build on previous work by a colleague of ours, Sylvia Breukers, who described this framework and its empirical application. The framework consists of the elements of justice, recognition, procedures, distribution, capabilities, responsibilities, and learning. And instead of describing how the literature perceives these concepts, I will immediately dive into what each concept means for assessing the engagement process within lightness. We understand justice through recognition as the acknowledgement and consideration of all actors and their respective wants, needs, and ambitions. Do people even strive to be part of a community? Is one of the questions that we ask. This also involves acknowledging the ambitions and the character of the community as a whole. Procedural justice is assessed based on the degree to which participants have access to complete, trustworthy, and relevant information about the project, and to which they can effectively influence decision-making. Within lightness, people are foreseen to make suggestions on how to adapt the two digital platforms according to their needs. But based on what people desire, they may also be able to decide about other aspects, for example, how the community is presented in the media. Also, in order for decisions to be impartial, the group of participants which is recruited must be representative for the entire community in terms of key demographic characteristics. Distributional justice is about the allocation of impacts of participating in the project. If someone feels that costs and benefits are allocated unfairly, this is an indication of distributional injustice. Capabilities concerns the degree to which participants can meaningfully contribute to the project. In other words, do people have the necessary skills and resources to make use of the opportunities that the engagement offers them? We give responsibilities of end users an explicit role within our framework. And we ask ourselves what is expected from participants during the course of the project, and in how far they are willing and able to fulfill their responsibilities. The framework is completed by the aspect of learning. Learning concerns the degree to which project partners, end users, and other stakeholders, such as intermediaries and utility providers, reflect on a process of engagement and derive lessons for further engagement. This includes reflecting about engagement activities which took place previously to the Lightness project. In each phase of the engagement, different activities are performed. For example, in the kickoff workshop, users state their ambitions and expectations regarding the project, while in the fourth workshop, they provide feedback about their experience with the digital energy trading platform. The elements of justice that I just described are operationalized separately for each of the engagement phases. Just to give you an idea, here's how the element of recognition is operationalized for each engagement phase. We formulated a general KPI for a just engagement concerning all phases, and for each of the phases identified the most important aspect in terms of recognition justice. The assessment of the quality of engagement within each of the pilots is based on project documentation. The performance of the 6 workshops and accompanying surveys is expected to deliver sufficient high quality data. The engagement of end users in Lightness will officially start end of this year. Results so far are based primarily on interviews and several workshops with the project partners responsible for the pilot sites. and with single interactions with end users and community intermediaries in some of the pilot sites. Therefore, all results that are presented now should be viewed as preliminary. What we've learned so far is that the communities in Lightness are initiated by an external party, namely the Lightness Project. The communities studied in the literature, on contrary, are so far mainly bottom-up or grassroots initiatives with an intrinsic motivation for saving energy, for example. The pilot communities within Lightness may have much different values and drivers than communities mentioned in the literature. Related to this, it is acknowledged that the people living in the pilot sites are bound together by living in the same house, district, or village, instead of by being intrinsically motivated to be concerned with energy. We also acknowledge that the communities are very different, mostly regarding their institutional readiness to form a community, and also in terms of their size. For example, in the Italian condominium, there's a resident with a technical background who's very enthusiastic about the Lightness project. And the residents in this condominium, they hold regular assemblies and joint diners. So this speaks for a strong community structure. In the Dutch pilot, on the other hand, the social housing residents barely know each other, and their primary concern is estimated not to be energy, but simply to live comfortably. In terms of procedures, we learned that all project partners see it as a challenge to involve a sufficiently large number of participants for the pilot community. Ideally, the group of recruited participants should be representative for the larger community, but this aim has proven to be rather idealistic. In theory, this biases decision-making processes because people with certain characteristics dominate within the pilot community. So, for example, in the Spanish pilot, those people are targeted for recruitment which are already interested in renewable energy production and which are typically male and highly educated. In terms of capabilities, we found that especially the Polish project partner, but also the others, are concerned that elderly people are not able to use the digital platforms in an appropriate way, or that they lack access to the necessary mobile devices needed for operating the digital platforms. We're now just 6 months down the project, and so far the framework has proven itself to be a very valuable theoretical lens to monitor several aspects of social justice in the context of energy communities. It is clear that further empirical application and validation of the framework is needed. This will be done during the coming months and years within the Lightness project. The fact that justice as a concept is pretty abstract makes it applicable to many cases. The framework actually lends itself to being adapted to different types of energy communities. In Lightness, we have a business park, a very small community, an entire village, and a community in which all inhabitants are social tenants. All of these communities may require a different kind of monitoring. For example, a large community in which intermediaries play an important role in initiating the community. In that case, monitoring must consider the motives of the intermediaries and how they may give shape to the engagement process according to their own interests. The question is in how far different communities and their process of development require different sorts of monitoring and evaluation. A limitation of our framework is that it is developed for communities which were initiated externally, in this case by a European research project. Grassroots or bottom-up initiatives will require an entirely different operationalization of the framework presented. Lastly, the EU directives, so the Internal Market Directive and the Renewable Energy Directive, steer towards an increasingly important role of energy communities in the European energy market. And the potential number of cases which the framework can be applied to is expected to increase throughout the coming years and decades. Thanks for your attention, and I'm looking forward to presenting this paper during the conference.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Are you able to unmute? And we can start with a few questions based on your presentation. I have a question as well for this voicer model that you use and you point out. You talk about in the paper as well, and in here too, that it can be interpreted in different ways, and that perhaps, you know, it can guide us to how to think about justice, but doesn't ensure justice in practice. And have you started now, you had like there how you're going to implement it at different workshops and throughout, what stage of the project are you in, and are you already finding perhaps some challenges to how it then can ensure justice in practice? Yep, we can't hear you. Maybe we try without the, yes, now I can hear you. Did you hear my question?
Oh, that's
We could try without the video. We hear you, but it seems to be delayed. Perhaps if you turn off the video, it might give us the sound better. I think we'll take the sound over the video.
hear me now.
Okay, we can, it's a little difficult to hear you. Perhaps, I think, Jordan, what you can do is you can see the question. We have one question also from Sarah Darby. So maybe we skip mine for now, because I think it's actually relevant. We've had several frameworks presented here, so we might be using that one for opening it up. But if you see the question that I've put in writing for you, Jordan, you can see from Sarah Darby, thanks you for the interesting presentation. And at this stage, can you say anything about how much the success of the digital engagement relates to in-person interactions in a community? Put another way, were the people who knew each other face-to-face more or less likely to engage in the digital platforms? Are any of your workshops held in person, or are they all online? And I leave that, Jordan, for perhaps you can answer in the chat directly, because we can send chat to all the send the answer to all of the attendees, because Jordan has dropped out at this point. So I'm going to open it up to all of the panelists, if you can, or the speakers today, if you can unmute yourselves and show your videos. We have Jordan back. Okay, so Jordan, I said there was one question for you in the chat, but I think we can also talk about these different frameworks about justice and the different approaches. And if any of you have questions or comments for each other that you wanted to make at this point.
I raised my hand.
Yes, go, Veronica.
Can I have a question to Julia about the gender and the street lighting? Do you know examples when other aspects of the street lighting is coordinated with like hedges along the roads, or so other elements of safety? Because, for example, I remember an example in Milton Keynes where the hedges have grown so high in the city that it became really unsafe to even like walk those roads. So do you know any integrated approach where street lighting is coordinated with other elements of safety?
Yeah, for this project, we only focused on street lighting, but actually there are many elements of the urban concept that are related to the gender safety. And there is a very interesting study made by a group of feminist architects who identified all the elements of the urban infrastructure that really limits the sense of safety of women and girls, not only women. And those are, for example, the position of the garbage in a street, or how even how the buildings are oriented despite to the street. Because if you walk in a street and there is no windows pointing on you, then you can really feel unsafe. And position of trees and all the green elements of the cities and so on. There are a lot of elements actually that really are related to women and girls' safety.
Okay, thanks a lot.
It's a good question. Eva, you also talked about the need to, or that perhaps gender was missing and something that you could add to it. Did you get some ideas listening to Julia?
Yes, thanks, really. Thank you very much, Julia. It was a very interesting presentation and it did give me lots of thought. And I was wondering if this could also connect to the discussion on like participation and being heard, because I could imagine, and I also have some experience of like where participation events are organized influences who would show up and also when. So some people might not want to go out in the evening or to spend a lot of time late at night, at least in certain places. So I think it also reflects on other aspects of indeed procedural justice.
We've got a question from our audience here that perhaps we have a few speakers that might be able to speak to it. So it's from Paula Henson. To what extent are justice and engagement linked to or dependent on the types of actors developing the community that we're talking about here? So the community members versus external third actors, as in Jordan's, we heard about different kinds of communities, particularly from Eva, Julia, and Jordan here. Does anyone of you want to comment on this? Eva.
Yeah, thanks. I this is a really good question. Thanks, Paula. And yeah, I guess this depends on how you understand justice as arising from within the community, or whether it can be also something that that communities do not always deal with. So I am a bit agnostic on this topic, but I would imagine that this is an empirical issue, and for example, studies like Jordan's can show we can see whether externally organized community could offer like more diversity, perhaps, I would imagine, but whether they are able to sustain this diversity is then maybe an open question or an empirical question to be seen.
But if I can just add something based on the gender aspect of any project, so it's not only, I mean, it's a part of the concept of justice, but something that we use in our methodologies for during the diagnostics we made in the two cities is to organize focus group discussions, but gender-based, in the sense that we made groups of only women to discuss about the project and anything related to the street lighting and their sense of safety, and not only about the security aspects, but also employment and activities and community, because women are really cut off from all these actions when the lights are not enlightened. And then we also organize groups with only men, and that really helps to understand better, because both groups feel more safe when they can talk with the same gender people around.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of aspects here to be considering around inclusion that we've heard from all the different speakers. I think also from the top down was interesting, Ingrid and Veronica too, that we have to think about just even the spaces and the access to digital and the skills in the first place, the infrastructure there that these communities then are based in, what kind of communities are vulnerable that you are identifying through here. Did you learn anything from the other presentations that you think you can incorporate into your further studies?
Absolutely. I think that, just this aspect of gender that we've been talking about, well, women are more likely to experience things like energy poverty. And women also are the ones who still have potentially less access to all these digital, learning processes and so on. So I think that, yeah, there's definitely some food for thought here, and the topics do interrelate with one another and sort of overlap slightly. So that's nice to see that and to sort of learn from each other's work.
Or even in the space of such a case study, which would look at a particular region, I can imagine that even the street lighting is being renovated or renewed in these places. Or even to look at domestic violence, because that is part of the discussion, like in a place where there is increasing unemployment, how domestic violence, and not only against women, but against everybody potentially. But this is all at the level of case studies, so yeah. So definitely it was very thought-provoking to listen to all the discussions in this panel.
Yes, as panel leaders, that's exactly what we wanted to happen. We bring together speakers on related topics, and it's made for a really interesting and varied set of papers, and hopefully, yeah, we've really been able to feed off each other. So that's terrific. Thank you very much, everybody. I think we need to...
and thank you, Fiona and Jessica, very much. For
thank you very much for a good
Jessica.
session. I'll just remind people that we've got half an hour till the next paper sessions. Lots of interesting paper sessions. I think, Fiona, you're also presenting in panel 9 on product regulation and its effects. Just a little plug. We also have 2 informal sessions later in a couple hours after the paper sessions. One led by Paolo Bertoldi from the European Commission, who will look at the impact of energy efficiency projects on property values, rents, and credit risks. And the other led by Cedric Generet from SIG will discuss the concept of pan-European interactive knowledge transfer platform for radical energy savings. Probably bring a glass of wine to that one. Okay, so still more to come. Make sure you take a little break and then on to the paper sessions and the informal radical sessions later. Thank you all for a very interesting panel. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.